You're listening to the Third Degree Podcast. And now, here are your hosts, Mandy Petrie and Brian J. Hatcher.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Third Degree Podcast. I'm Brian Hatcher, and with me, Mandy Petrie.
Hello, Brian. You know, I see you did our regular intro music. I was kind of expecting with the subject today that you would maybe have done the Price is Right intro and given us some theme there.
Very possible. For the last few weeks, I have been going down this rabbit hole that I wanted to talk about with you today that started out with, of all places, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Okay.
And for the listeners who may not be familiar with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, normally when you see a graphic of it, it looks like a triangle. It's divided into 5 sections. And although this theory has, to some degree, been debunked.
The pyramid scheme of peopling, if you will.
Possibly. But basically the way that it works is the layer on the bottom represents physical needs like food and clothing and shelter and water.
Basic survivability.
Exactly. And then when you get above that, you start getting into social needs like having a good job, having good friends, being respected, getting a job that pays well, and ownership of things, owning property, your own car. And then the layer above that, emotional needs, such as having strong relationships, strong family ties, and intimate relationships. And then above that, you get to the layer of societal needs, which is that people in society respect you, that you have a name, maybe you're famous, but people regard you well, and even people who don't know you by reputation. Mm-hmm. And then above that, you come to the peak. The tip of the pyramid is self-actualization. That's where you get into the spiritual side and creative side, figuring out who you are as a person and making a lasting contribution to the world.
So the idea is that each one is a building block on the other. If you don't have this bottom layer,
right, then
you can't feasibly have a good relationship with the next layer.
Right.
So if your basic needs aren't being met, if you don't have food and housing, then you wouldn't be able to seek out having a good relationship with another person. Those are along the lines.
And not only that, you wouldn't care about that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you don't particularly care about your art career.
Right.
And so the theory of the hierarchy of needs are wherever you fall in there until you're able to fulfill that level. The levels above aren't anything you even concern yourself with, much less are able to do anything about. And of course, the farther down you get, the more dire your situation is. If you don't have a girlfriend, things are rough, but it's not nearly as rough
if you don't have a house. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize, as you and I both live in a society of late-stage capitalism, that our society, for many of these levels, has the same answer, which is money.
Yes.
If you don't have food, you know what'll solve that?
Money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you don't own a car, you know what'll solve that?
Money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you're not getting laid, you know what'll solve that?
Money.
Mm-hmm. If you want people to respect you, you know what'll solve that? The same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, until you get to the top, which is self-actualization. That's where money doesn't really answer the question. But I was thinking about that, and I've got some thoughts, and I wanted to bounce some of this off of you and get your opinions. I think one reason why capitalism, especially late-stage capitalism, has the same answer for a lot of these levels is because that way you can sell the same product to more people. I mean, obviously, a person who's looking to buy a car doesn't have the same problems as somebody who's looking for a sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
But if money's the solution, you can sell the same solution to everybody. And it's funny that I use that term, sell, because that's something else that I began to notice. Not only is money the answer to most people's problems, except, of course, that top layer,
but it's used to swindle people into thinking they can reach that top layer.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So it's
absolutely.
used to sell the top layer.
They will sell you on the idea
Mhm.
of being able to reach that top level, but
Be
they'll
it
never give it to you.
Yeah, be it crystals or the prayer hotlines, the spiritual retreats, whatever you're looking for, they'll send it to you.
Not just that, also consider things like grind culture. This idea that you can work your way to being your best self.
Mhm.
You can get that side hustle that's going to make you a bunch of money, and
Mhm.
then you don't have to worry about anything ever again. But you're absolutely right. The idea of money being the solution to all your problems never really deals with the top layer except as lip service. They want to sell it to you. They don't want you to have it. They want to sell the possibility, because if you get to the top, then they basically lose a customer, because if you know who you are as a person and you're well balanced, then everything else takes care of itself. And so money's not the solution anymore. And they ain't wanting that. When I was very young, I was a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman for Kirby.
I had no idea, Brian. That's amazingly hilarious.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
For about 6 or 8 months, I was living in Richmond, Virginia. This was right after I got out of seminary, and I thought I had to do something with my life. It wasn't going to be living with my mom or dad or something. I had a friend living in Richmond, so I moved in with him and found a job as a salesman. After about 6 to 8 months, I wound up having to come home. I was maybe 19 or 20, something like that. One thing definitely, if you've ever seen Glengarry Glen Ross, either on stage or seen the movie, they got salesmen down to a T. That whole thing is true. The whole thing about being browbeaten and this idea that getting their name on the line, which is dotted, is the most important thing ever. And it doesn't matter how you get there, just as long as you get there. I was very much a part of that culture for a little while. It is the core of a lot of what we see here in this late stage capitalism. It's all about creating needs in people and then selling them the solution to it, or at least a valuable distraction from it. As I started looking over Maslow's hierarchy and this idea of salesmanship and marketing, I began to realize just how inundated our own beliefs in ourselves are tied into this idea of worth. It's a word you see everywhere. If somebody's treating you badly, what does somebody tell you as your friend? It's like, you need to understand what your worth is. You shouldn't let them treat you that way.
You deserve better.
You need somebody who values you. In relationships, I've heard the term a high value man or a high value woman. And I understand that when you start looking for a pattern, you see it everywhere. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how this idea of value, of being valued, directs a lot of what we do as people. Because ultimately it turns us into people who are useful in society, useful in a group, even if it is against our own self-interests. For example, guys, going into the military is not in your best self-interest, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you're getting shot at and possibly killed. But people do it because we value people who are willing to put their lives on the line. One thing that late stage capitalism did to our lifestyles by taking us away from an agricultural society to more industrial was that it used to be that when parents had children, these children grew up and became workers on the farm.
The next generation.
They became the next generation. You built this family farm. Now the structure is people have children, they raise those children, they send them to schools, they send them to college, they pay for all of it. And then those kids now become part of a workforce, and basically their labor makes money for other people. Reproduction is a part of the money-making machine and very important. Society teaches women that their value is in having children. And therefore, their value is in their ability to make men want to have children with them. It ties into this value aspect. And it's also why other types of relationships that are not one male, one female aren't as valued. They're not as likely to produce children. The more I started to see how much this idea of being able to put a price tag on ourselves, even an imaginary price tag, how much it affects what we do, what we're willing to put up with, what we expect from other people. It's so tied into thought, you don't even consider it for the most part. But we use language. even if you know it, linguistics is understanding that once you have language for something and you use that language as thought, you can't think outside of it. If there's not a word for it, you can't even really consider it.
Right.
And if the
Yes.
language leans a certain way, then your thought leans that way.
Which is why it's so fun when we get introduced to other words. Like the very first time we learned the word Schadenfreude from Germany.
Yeah.
And then everyone got so excited, like, oh my goodness, there's a word for that. And now I understand that other people have this feeling. And
Yeah. This idea that we are linguistically geared to seeing ourselves and the people around us as having a sort of metaphysical price tag.
yes.
Understandably, we could see our relationships and our purpose in life outside of that model. But it's so ingrained in us, it would be very difficult to figure out what that model should be. If I were to tell you how much your friendship means to me, I'm ultimately saying what it's worth to me.
Mhm.
I would probably say something like, Mandy, I really value you as a friend. That word would come up.
Yep.
But it's tied to this idea that our friendship is based upon what you give to me and what I'm able to give to you.
Right.
Outside of that, what would be the purpose of being friends with each other if I didn't supply something to you or you didn't supply something to me?
Right. There's some kind of currency there, a reciprocity, be it emotional, intellectual, other fancy words that your writer brain could come up with.
Any of the needs that we're talking about on the hierarchy of needs, any of those things. But my value to myself, what makes me a good person is the ability to put a roof over my head and give myself food. It's also built into this idea of being able to own things, have nice things, and have strong relationships. And then later on, it's built into having very close relationships and being able to provide for other people, which is another one of these late capitalism traps that men fall into, even though it's not as prevalent in society. At least it doesn't get as much lip service as it used to, but the idea that the man was the provider
Oh,
and was
yes.
supposed to take care of the woman, we don't get as much lip service as that anymore. But it's still a part of our psyche and our culture as men to a degree that a man wouldn't even consider the possibility of being in a relationship with a woman who makes more money. And part of it, of course, is pride. But another part of it is, what's the point of me being in a relationship if I can't provide for her? If I can't give her something she can't give to herself, then what's the reason for me? There isn't one. I'm a waste of her time. Why even bother?
Right.
As messed up as that is, if you step back and kind of look at it, within the structure that we're brought up in, it has its own kind of weird sense.
Yeah, and we're actually getting more and more people getting called out for that particular one because it's been so ingrained that men went out to work and then they came home and sat down. That's still the way that it's been, because now you can't afford to do that anymore. The man goes out to work 8 hours a day. The woman goes out to work 8 hours a day. Man comes home and sits down. Woman comes home and continues to work.
Right.
The man does not know the children's pediatrician. The man does not know what allergies the child has, what time softball or when the ballet class tuition is due. There are so many people getting divorces because the wife would rather take care of 3 children with child support than take care of 4 children.
Yeah.
It's getting called out more and more. People are discussing this as a divorce because there's so much more of a workload put on the woman because you can't afford one income in a household. There's 2 incomes, but only one person working 2 full-time jobs.
Right. What's interesting about this example you give, think about this. How would you describe the problem in that relationship? The easiest way of describing it is you have one partner, the woman, who is providing more value to this relationship than the other partner, right? The way value is tied into all of this is you have a couple, they're in this relationship, and the woman comes home and she has to be the man's piece as well as take care of the house. And the man doesn't do much else. However, if the two of them were both genuinely happy with that situation, if the woman didn't have a problem with that, the man didn't have a problem with that, if they were happy in their relationship, they're like, this is the way it is the way we want it, Us on the outside would be looking in going, yeah, but you shouldn't be.
Mhm.
It's inherently unfair.
Mhm.
And the way we figure out that that's unfair is a value judgment. What is the most fair relationship? What do we always say? All relationships should be 50-50, right? And that's a value judgment. That's the idea that both people should give equally to a relationship. Even saying that maybe that shouldn't necessarily be the case if you're not doing a value judgment, even I am going, wait a minute, hold on a second, people should do that. I mean, even I would argue that no, relationships shouldn't need to be that. You should be happy with your partner and your partner should be happy with you. And if that's the case, then everything else, doesn't matter. Logically, that sounds right. But there's something inherently bothering about the idea that two people might be in a relationship and they don't contribute equally to it. But then again, that's all value. It's about determining value. And one thing I've learned in game theory is that value only comes from the person placing the value. Whatever you value something, that's what its value is to you.
Mhm.
And the same thing for me. That's the other thing that's insidiously sneaky about money as a concept. It allows us to value the same thing in the same way.
Mhm.
Because going back to relationships, if you have two partners who have different values as compared to sexual relationships, if they value sex differently, most people would say you're going to have problems in that relationship. Both partners should have the same value for that. So a relationship shouldn't work if the two partners value that aspect of their relationship differently. Now, the question is that true? Should that be true? I'm not making a value judgment on the idea of value judgments. I'm not saying something is necessarily good or bad. I'm not saying we should not use value as a benchmark for our relationships with other people, our views with ourselves. I'm not saying that we should just throw that out.
Mhm.
I'm saying it would be nearly impossible to throw that out right now because what do we replace it with, first of all? It would be a colossal undertaking to try to come up with another system that we could replace that with because we would have to deprogram ourselves, even down to the linguistic level, just above reptilian. And I'm not even exaggerating
Yep.
about that. The ability to comprehend anything outside of language is impossible for human beings. So it would become a point where we would maybe even have to change language itself to get there. But then how do we figure out what we should use instead? And how do we judge that? We would need to look at different systems and figure out the value in all of them. But in figuring out the value, now we're going back to value. It is a dreadful treadmill. It is a gerbil wheel of hell. So what's the point of all of this? I think the point is to figure out and understand why we do what we do. Why do we make the determinations that we make? Why, even on a spiritual level, are we somewhat Calvinistic in that we believe our ability to fulfill our needs in Maslow's hierarchy is representative of what God thinks about us? That's a very Calvinistic thought, but Calvinism and the thought of our prosperity on earth as a demonstration of our place in heaven is a huge part of what shapes the way we think about ourselves, even if we wouldn't consider ourselves religious. Capitalism is built on the bedrock of that concept. For me, I think the first part of it is understanding where all of this comes from, understanding how much it actually does affect us. And understanding that me trying to think well about myself and have confidence, self-esteem, and self-respect, how much I'm depending on a lot of those things to build onto that. And understanding that if something terrible were to happen, I were to lose my job tomorrow and I couldn't make my car payment and I didn't know where my next meal was coming from, all the good things I ever thought about myself would be out the door. Even though I understand where that's coming from, I wouldn't feel as good about myself as I do right now. It's all ingrained into me.
Right.
Logically, I should still be the same person, homeless and without a job, as I would be where I am now if I were to win the Powerball and have millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Logically, I should still be that same person regardless. But for all intents and purposes, I wouldn't be. It comes down to understanding that this is a thing, then figuring out what do you want to do about that? Do I not like this system? It certainly has its flaws, but then what do I replace it with? I also understand that replacing the system with my own makes me an outsider because other people, they're going to evaluate me by their rules, not by any I come up with for myself. Holding down a job, being social, or having a domicile, if I don't think that's important, people aren't going to look at me and go, oh, he's figured out a new system. He's living a new way. No, it's like the scene in the diner from Pulp Fiction where Jules decides he's going to walk the earth like Caine in Kung Fu. And he's wanting to do this for spiritual reasons. And Vincent is like, dude, this is not a spiritual thing. You're basically deciding you want to be a bum.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have an income and a permanent address, that's all you're going to be. Whatever system I would decide to come up with if I chose to get away from this system, people couldn't help but misinterpret it because we wouldn't have that common frame of reference.
And not everyone has that choice. Like, he would be ultimately fine. Not everyone would be safe doing such a thing. Sticking to the system gives you a certain safety.
Mm-hmm.
Staying within the realm, staying in the box. It sounds like a really fun, cool, edgy idea, being the outsider, being the one who thinks outside the box and lives by their own rules, but ultimately there's safety in our societal rules.
Yeah.
So,
and on the other side of it is that when you do stray from the path, even a little bit, whenever you make that threat of not being valuable to society in one way or another, society gets real damn hostile to you.
Yep.
To the point of sometimes even violence. The outsiders, like the hippies or alternative people with different haircuts, goths. You can even look at black culture.
Yeah. Tulsa.
Exactly. The whole thing with Tulsa, where they were wanting to put themselves outside white-dominated financial institutions and build their own.
And they were prosperous. And our system said, can't have that.
Yeah. And so they definitely broke that down. But here's the thing also. They were stepping outside of society, but at the same time, they weren't. They were building their own building, but with the same tools.
They were following the rules.
Yeah.
But just the wrong people didn't like it.
Yeah. So it was the same thing that everybody else was doing. It was capitalism. It just wasn't part of the big group. And because it wasn't part of the group, it was to be shunned. Anything that you do that puts you outside of the group, whether you mean to do it or not, whether you decide you want to live in a van and drive all over the country, or maybe you have autism and your social cues aren't the same as other people's. The minute you step outside societal expectation, the storm's coming. Society coming down on people who don't fit the mold. It's built into us on a psychological level. In fact, it's built into us to such a degree that we have an emotional response to somebody breaking convention unknowingly, where they don't realize that they're breaking a convention. And although we do, we have an emotional response known as cringe.
Yes, that is cringeworthy. Ew.
Yes. But that's exactly where it comes from. You cringe at those things that break societal norms, especially when the person doing it doesn't realize they're doing it. We have that emotional response of cringing when that happens. Evolution has bred us to go after the person causing us to cringe to make them stop doing it. That's why it's such an intense reaction. Our ability to create teams and bond together has been the main reason why humanity has survived as long as it has, and it's what's built our society. But also some of the most horrible things about us, different levels of society, exalting some people while disregarding other groups.
It's classism.
Classism, racism, ageism, sexism, our ability to have an us versus them. It all comes from that. I can see the value of value, but I can also see the danger of value. The question then becomes, what do we do about that? Well, I don't think we can do anything about it until we realize what the structure of it is that's underlying all of it. I think once we get to a place as a society that we can see that, then maybe over time we can start to change it. But like everything else, you can't fix a problem until you know there is one. Something to think about.
Something to think about.
And something we can leave everyone, all the listeners, to think about. And so just wanted to say, until next time, people, keep thinking, if even just for one more degree. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Third Degree Podcast. Please remember, The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any advice shared during the show should not be considered medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for medical concerns or before making any health-related decisions. The Third Degree Podcast is a Hanging J production.